My brother helped me out on this, but essentially we created these flyers, and I would,
Yeah.
put out that like I was teaching tennis. All tennis courts, imagine at this point in LA, were closed, even public, like nothing was accessible.
Yeah.
Um, and we went on Google Maps and we just found like all the private courts we could possibly find on Google Maps or Google Earth or whatever. And we wrote down the addresses, and then we printed out about 100 of these flyers, and then we drove around the city for a couple of days, spent a couple hours a day doing it, and just passed these flyers out to like mailboxes and put them in fences, whatever. And the whole theory was
That's very cool. That's very, I like
I
that.
appreciate that. The
Yeah.
whole, honestly, I'm thinking back at that time. I think I was really just looking. I mean, I don't know where you were at in life at that point, but I was really just looking for a way to be useful, like looking for a way to, do something in a time where it felt like we couldn't do a lot. And, I was like late 20s and I felt like I had, a lot of energy and a lot to give, but you can only wake up and work out once or twice a day, so many days in a row before you feel like it gets a little dull.
Yeah.
And so I actually offered that too. That was part of the flyer. Like, hey, if you don't want to tennis, like I'll be a personal trainer too. And I do have a background in that as well. So I was like, again, just really trying to, make myself useful there. And, you know, my goal was if out of those 100 or 120 or whatever we did, if just one person called me back, that would be a win, right? Because that could lead to
Hmm.
something, or it could be, I don't know, something. And literally one person did. And that's the court I'm at now. So um the
That's
owner of that essentially had just stepped away from his job. He used to travel 300 days a year, and all of a sudden he's cooped up in that house, and it's a very different lifestyle. And he had a tennis court. He played very little when he grew up, but um I think he was also looking for ways to still kind of like, make himself useful and do something, right? So you got a court in your backyard, you got to at least like try it, right? So
Yeah, but this isn't just like a normal house. This is like an insane residence.
it's a wild one.
Like
Yeah.
there's a website for it. Like, so when
Yeah.
you started there, it's first off, it's an interesting story because I can completely relate. Okay.
But,
I did the whole thing where I was a tennis coach, after my university days, and then I went to like the Bahamas
oh, wow.
for like teaching tennis at a Club Med, kind of like you went to Aspen. I
Oh,
eventually got kicked out after 6 months, but we don't need to get into that right now. I
okay.
was 22. I was 22 and stupid. But
Not before me
and
got
then
as well.
yeah, another time. And then I actually had a similar idea to you. Now, my follow through isn't as good as yours. I
Okay.
didn't actually go create the flyers and go to individual residences, but as a tennis coach myself back in the day, I thought that would actually be a really interesting business model. I did something different where I went to all the different like 5-star hotels in Vancouver and I handed out flyers for any guests
Right.
that would come and they were looking for a hit. And I met some really cool people in show business because we've got a big entertainment industry here in Vancouver and whatnot. But super interesting. So then you drop the flyer off at a bunch of like probably a lot of incredible homes. You get a call back, and was that to be like the individual, just a coach for the owner of that home? Because you obviously coach a number of people on that court now. So do you get like kind of exclusive use to coach that coach, or how did that all happen?
Yeah, I mean, it was really all just like, hey, do you want to hit kind of thing? And I was like,
Right.
sure, let's hit. And I honestly, with all this stuff, I never really went into it like, I'm going to make this my business. It was really more of a place of, let's make myself useful. Let's try to meet some people. Let's try to see if we can get something sort of rolling. I mean, you know, uh, wasn't doing much at that time. There really wasn't a lot of opportunities in LA unless you already had something, stable, whether it was like an office job or something.
Yeah.
So we just started hitting. And then after that first hit, he was like, let's do this 3 days a week. We'll do Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And yeah, and we'll just hit. And essentially, I mean, he's a very fit guy. He's a lot of energy, very impressive. But we started like, he was pretty beginner to start with. And so, we obviously went through the basics, but then just pretty quickly got up to hitting. And then those sessions really turned into, you've done those too, more of like hitting conditioning sort of sessions where it's half fitness, you could say, too, because it's a real session. So I view it as my sessions too at some point, honestly, because I get a lot out of it as well.
Right.
But at the time as well, because I got a little momentum there, all of a sudden, people picked up on it. I would post it a little bit. It's a very exclusive, if you've seen, very nice court, very good views. It stands out. And especially that time, everyone were posting their home workouts. Like that's all they
Yeah.
saw every day. So I think it really stood out on social media that I was at a very unique place. And I felt like I was very fortunate, very lucky. And I really just enjoyed every single time I was there. So because of that, different people started reaching out, and I quickly got connected to different celebrities, influencers, and they were sort of all over town. And so some of them also had a private court, and they would like, "Hey, can you come train me here? Can you come train me there?" So at some point, very quickly, I sort of like had my Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I would drive out to 3 different courts in one day. Essentially, I'd be in Venice in the morning, then Silver Lake later in the day, and maybe Topanga in the evening. And back then, all that was 20-minute drive. Like that's all it was, because there was no traffic. Right now, it'd be
Right.
insane to try to do that because it's like an hour
Yeah.
each way.
Yeah.
So I listen again. I thought it was just fun. Like I was having fun. I wasn't thinking about like, oh, I need to charge a lot of money. I need to. I was literally just like, listen, I'm getting to, I'm building relationships. I'm getting to know new people. And this is fun. I'm outside. I'm doing the thing I love the most, which is play tennis, right? I did that for a few months, and then at some point, the owner of the court essentially went, "Listen, you're spending a lot of time driving around, this and that. Why don't we cut a deal and you essentially just set up shop here if you want? On those days that we train, you'll see me in the morning, and then you can do whatever you want the rest of the day,
Cool.
and that way you don't have to drive around as much." And that's just how it started, and then from there, I sort of just started building the roster, and a lot of that was through social media. I
Yeah.
would post, and people would repost me, and you get a couple influencers, celebrities, then all of a sudden things start to move quickly, especially in Los Angeles, right? So,
And
um,
is that would you say that's how some of the brands kind of started recognizing you as well? I know that Reigning Champ, I'm wearing a
mm,
Reigning Champ hat actually right now. They're a Vancouver-based company. They did a collaboration with Prince. They sent
mm.
you some stuff. I saw that like some other brands are sending you things. How did those I wouldn't call them necessarily partnerships, but how did those relationships start to happen?
I think, I started getting a lot of people in the fashion industry as clients. Some
Yeah.
of them had their own brands. I think one of my first like influencer clients was, Emily Oberg, also Canadian,
Yeah.
who
From
owns Sporting.
Vancouver.
Right, right, that's right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and owns Sporty and Rich. And so, I started sort of getting somewhat associated with that. And that's when they really started leaning into tennis as well. And not just like, country club, but a bit more specific to tennis. And she was playing tennis, and we got connected through a friend, and I just brought her on. And then after that, that sort of led to other people in the industry being interested. She obviously knows a lot, so she introduced me to a lot. And then it was really just word of mouth. And I've always, and you can probably relate to this as well, being a tennis coach, I've always, prioritized, referrals at the end of the day, because someone says something good about someone, then usually that
Sure.
tracks, right? So that's how that happened. And then my social media, because of I was training these people, started growing. I mean, 3 years ago, I had what, 700 followers or something, right? And now I got, I think, close to 20,000. And a lot of that was just like, people seeing that I was with these people. And then I think because of that, I started leading in a little bit into content creation as well. Not that I necessarily feel like I've really done that to the extent that I've seen other tennis influencers do, but I think brands like that I did that. And then also I was associated with a lot of those people. And then some brands that I got connected with on a personal level knew that I was training celebrities. And I don't really post, I don't ever really post celebrities, to be honest.
Yeah.
That's a different thing for me that I try to sort of just keep
Sure.
private. But I think you look at brands like Tonal, for example, which I've done a couple of campaigns with. Their price point is minimum $5,000 for their equipment and installation. The type of person who can pay for that are usually a celebrity or a high level influencer or someone in that caliber, right? So that's a brand that's interested in working with me because they can get access to that. High level or like high priced mattresses, clothing, um, perfumes, whatever you want to call it. Those are usually the brands that reach out to me because they know that's the type of clientele that I train, right?
Is
So,
there would you say there's like an opportunity as like I hate to use the word influencer because it sounds whatever, but like a tennis influencer on social media, like I don't feel like there's that many.
No.
Meanwhile, tennis, as I mentioned previously in a conversation where I feel like tennis is moving in the direction where it used to be. It's kind of like, again, it's cool again, right? Like back in the
Mm.
day, there was like the Stan Smith shoe, the McEnroe, the Borg era where it tennis influenced like society,
Yep.
and it influenced like brands outside of the sport. Um, and I feel like it's at that point again. You know what I mean? And we can
I agree.
talk a little bit more about that. But when it comes to actually people like on Instagram, tennis influencers, I don't feel like there's that many that are overly cool that are really like tapped into the culture of tennis. Like,
Right.
I'm assuming you saw an opportunity there and you took advantage of it.
Yeah, I would say so, but I never
Like,
felt
I'm not
like
saying like, it wasn't with
yeah,
direct intent where I'm going to, like it happened more organically, I'm sure.
yeah, yeah. No, I never felt like I went against what I would want to do, if that makes sense. A lot like along the way, a lot of people were like, you should really do a lot more content where you're also doing instructional stuff and videos and all that. But that doesn't feel like me, so I never really did it. Like I think when you look at tennis influencers now, a lot of people are doing that. It's also kind of what's the most relevant, I think. Like that makes sense to me. That's not the type of coach I am, and that's not really what I think I provide. Like that's not my best card. I'm okay at it, but I think I have other qualities that's more on brand for me. So I never really went into it that way. I think I went more into it in a way of like, having interesting people come on court, interesting conversations. The aesthetic and the visuals of what I put out there is a bit different. And kind of create more of a brand around it being tennis being a cool thing, by itself, instead of me preaching all these things. You could say. But yeah, it took advantage in the sense that I saw that this was growing and a lot of people were leaning into it, and I said yes to every opportunity, 100%.
Right.
That was also the fun part, honestly. I mean, listen, ever since I went into this, every day felt like it was growing. My business was growing. I was having more fun with it. I was learning something new every day. I feel like I was becoming a better coach, a better business person. So it felt like this massive wave that I was just riding. And I still feel like I'm riding. Like the business hasn't slowed down. Like 3 years later, I'm still getting a lot of people reaching out to me for brand deals, and people want to get on court, and partnerships, whatnot, events, you name it. So yeah, you could say that. Yeah.
So like just on the topic of brands,
Mm.
so you mentioned Emily Oberg, Sporty and Rich. It kind of initially was the country club vibe, and then it's really like a lot of their designs are focused around tennis. Maybe it's just the um, latest designs that they've put out, but there's been a big focus on their marketing around tennis. Are there any other brands that you see like up and coming right now? Because in my opinion, the iconic tennis brands, the Nikes, the Adidas, the A6, but mainly like Nike and Adidas, like in my opinion, they were really cool like 10 years ago when Federer and Nadal were like at their prime, and they've fallen off a little bit from a design perspective. I just don't think that when it comes to like, their bottom line, that tennis competes with other sports. You know what I mean? Like a basketball, for example. So therefore they haven't put the attention, the time into it. Their best people haven't focused on tennis, and they've fallen off a bit, which in my opinion means that there's opportunities for other brands to come in and swoop some of the market share. Are there
Totally
other
agree.
are there other brands that you like right now that have approached you? Is there anything off like top of your head that you like or that you see like coming out soon?
It's a great question. I think those top brands, in my opinion, definitely have fallen off. I think a big reason, you just mentioned it too, and I've talked to a couple of those people. At the end of the day, tennis is more of a check the box for them. That's not what's bringing in any sort of revenue of relevance for them, right? So they
Yeah.
can get away with anything, and we're still going to buy whatever has a swoosh on it, right? So I don't like a lot of the stuff they're putting out. I mean, but I mean, people still buy it.
Yeah.
I mean, I like Reigning Champ, and I like brands like Reigning Champ who don't come at it from we're a tennis brand, because I actually think a lot of tennis fashion right now is much more related to athleisure stuff you wouldn't wear just on the tennis court, but also stuff you would wear to, let's say you go to Pilates, you go to the gym, you go get a smoothie or something you can actually wear every single day. Like a
Yeah.
bit like yoga clothes sort of became a thing as well, that you would wear it outside to somewhat more signal that you're a person who do those things, but it's not exclusive to tennis. Because if you go into actual specific tennis clothes, it can also almost look a little bit like, not nerdy, but a little bit like I'm playing tennis and that's it. And I
Yeah.
think it's actually, we're in a place right now in fashion where it's cooler to have some sort of overlap, that it's more of a lifestyle you're reaching it,
Mm.
like you're leaning into, and not just like I played tennis today, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
And
agree.
I do think if you look at brands that do well with that, is Reigning Champ. I also think Lacoste does well because they've managed to, they're not just a tennis brand, they're also a fashion brand. So they're, in my opinion, of the old school big brands, they're the brands that does the best, in my opinion. Also their design, they're still doing great. The stuff they come out with, they're taking chances sometimes, but they pull it off. I mean, they got two really good athletes, Djokovic obviously, and then Medvedev, and then Grigor Dimitrov. Now Grigor can pull a lot off. He looks great, right? So that's great. He can be sort of their model. But the fact that
Yeah.
you can make Medvedev and Djokovic look cool, I think that's pretty damn awesome. You got away with that, you know. I mean, Djokovic rolling up in like the vintage French Open bomber for the French Open. I
Yeah.
think Medvedev did it too. I think that was a great move. I mean, honestly, they're pulling it off. So I think they're one of the few ones. And then the other brands that I wear and that I like, they're not necessarily going to be your tennis brands. I mean, I'm almost more attracted to like a running brand that has a little bit of edge, but maybe come and added more. Like you could wear this to like, the gym as well. You could wear it to, on the tennis court. Like District Vision is a brand I've worked with for a couple of
Mm.
years. And
I feel like they, though, like when you look at the sponsorships of tennis players, yeah, you mentioned like the Djokovic, the Dimitros, and Medvedevs, but then there's like the guys that are like outside of the top like 35 in the world, and some of these guys don't even have brand sponsorships.
right.
And I feel like, some of these brands can go find like for example, like Kokonakis, love him or hate him, I don't know, but he's kind of a cool guy. Nike dropped him, a year and a half ago or 2 years ago when he was out with shoulder injuries and other injuries. And then Cotton, I think it's called Cotton, like an Australia
Yeah.
brand that I'd never heard of, endorsed them. He started wearing their stuff. And I doubt they're paying him very much money at all, if anything, other than just providing him gear.
Yeah.
And I'm a little surprised that there's not other like smaller brands that are trying to tap into like putting their clothes on different like professional tennis players out there, because it seems to me like easy pickings. Would you agree with that?
No, it's a very good point. Thinking about that now too, yeah, why wouldn't they? But
Right?
I mean, they must be get paid. I mean, if you're third in the world, you must be getting paid something, or you must be playing with, the racket. If you're playing with Yonex, you're probably wearing Yonex. That might be part of your contract. I
Yeah, but
think otherwise,
that's gonna ruin your brand appeal when you're wearing Yonex out there. I feel like those guys wearing the Yonex, it just
you
like
don't
does
say,
not
yeah.
help them. They're never gonna get a watch deal. They're never gonna get another deal because like they just
No,
look like crap out there.
right. Yeah. Hey, you said it. I agree.
I've on my previous pod, I've ripped Yonex clothes like
Really?
over and over again.
Yeah,
I don't know why. I don't know why they can't just figure it out. Whereas, okay, on the
I
on the
agree.
other hand, Wilson
Yeah,
is the opposite. They're actually starting to put out some really cool shit,
I think they're one of the few
and
brands who figured it out. Yeah,
they're one of the brands that have figured it out. Like
yeah,
obviously, the equipment has always been like top of the game,
yeah.
right? But their fashion was kind of like they never really seemed like they
No,
put much of an effort into it,
right. Check the
right?
box. Yeah.
But now they're starting to, and I know they have a new designer at Wilson who's going to be coming on the pod hopefully soon.
Oh,
And I wanted to like talk to her about where the inspirations come from, but they've like totally turned the corner. And
totally.
I feel like whoever's wearing Wilson now, there's that Ukrainian girl Kotsiak or whatever,
Mhm.
like Wimbledon and the US Open, she had the best outfits by
Right.
far, and it was Wilson.
Right. Yeah.
So
There you go.
I don't know. It's like, I don't know, but as far as like the collaborations go, you're seeing like Wilson and Kith, which is another cool thing,
Yeah.
right? So they're doing some other cool things. Like, are there any out there? Do you like the Wilson Kith collab? Are there other collaborations that you've like been really like excited about?
Yeah, I like that one. They did a good job keeping it. I mean, I think what Wilson has understood is at the end of the day, the best tennis brand is the heritage sort of country club feel. At the end of the day, that's what sells. The Ralph Lauren, the sort of like expensive sort of look at and that's speaking of Yonex, that's what I think they get wrong. Their design has nothing to do with that, right?
Yeah.
That's why they've done well with it. I look at brands like Sporting Rich. That's part of why they've done so well. They lean into that as well. The heritage, the vintage, the country club, the Wimbledon sort of feel that we get from tennis. Because at the end of the day, I think that's the highest value, and that's what we reference to tennis, right?
But
Um,
do you think that it should continue to be the country club look, or do you think it should be a little bit more street? Like, what would you like to see?
I think it's slowly turning a little more street in some sense. I mean, Reigning Champ is pretty neutral, but in the end of the
Yeah.
day, I think it's more in that realm. And I think brands around, like similar to Reigning Champ, whether it's Brain Dead has done a little something as well. There's more of a street brand to me that's same as
Mhm.
if Supreme did something, right?
Right.
Those brands starting to do different collaborations, and I think Prince has done a good job with this. They've
Hmm.
experimented with different brands. Not all brands they work with would I necessarily agree that they should work with, but they just, for example, Reigning Champion Prince just did another, capsule. They did one
Yeah.
last year as well, and they sent it to me, and I thought it was phenomenal. And they really only made like a couple of small items, but there's no reason why they shouldn't do more. And I think that would help both out. But I don't know what Prince's um, where they're at right now in terms of their goals and what they're going for and whatnot. Obviously, they're not signing big players anymore. But if I were them, I would just completely lean into that and take advantage of all the other brands sort of like fumbling right now and not being sure what the hell they're trying to do. Because really, it seems like Wilson's the only one who's of the racket brands, at least, that's like figured this out and leaning into it and speaking the language that the customer wants, to speak. Really, yeah,
Prince, just to provide like a bit of a background on Prince, is they were basically a defunct,
yeah,
bankrupt almost company, and they got bought out by, it's called like Athletics Group or something like that. And I'm that's not the right name, but it's something along those lines. And this is the company that goes and they own a ton of brands.
yeah,
And typically the brands that they go are brands that you would recognize, but they've kind of like they've ran out of that like brand power and they've essentially gone into bankruptcy. So it would be like the
right,
Forever 21s, like Vince, like all of these like celebrity type brands, like the Shaquille O'Neal brand, all these. Anyway, this company bought Prince, and then they're being smart, right? They're reviving it by associating it with other brands
yeah,
that are cool right now. So I think it's actually a really smart play by
right.
them or other brands that have kind of had their day, obviously by association. And Prince is still kind of cool, you know what I mean? Because
I think
it
so.
wasn't cool, but because it's had that time and now that nostalgic feel of it,
Yeah.
I mean, makes it cool again.
There's a lot of
So
opportunity. I don't know how driven and focused they are right now, but there's a lot of opportunity for them to really lean into this and
yeah,
become the main brand outside of the pro tour right now. But like for the average consumer who's out there playing the Weekend Warriors, why shouldn't it be? If you want to be cool, why shouldn't you play with Prince? I mean, I played with Prince growing up. I thought they had great rackets too. Like, why wouldn't you completely lean into it?
totally
Um,
agreed.
yeah,
What do you think about the luxury brands getting into tennis? So the partnerships with Alcaraz and Louis Vuitton. You've got Gucci and Yannick Sinner. You have Dior, Felix Aliassime. I wouldn't call Hugo Boss a luxury brand, but you got
no,
Hugo
but
Boss
right,
and Berrettini.
yep.
What are your thoughts on those? Which ones do you think work? Which ones don't?
I think all those fashion brands, high level fashion brands, have done really well because they understand that right now tennis is the thing and they're leaning into it and they're working with the right people. And I haven't seen one that didn't work, honestly. And I think it helps elevate tennis too. I think we both win, both the fashion world and tennis wins. And it's really a recognition that tennis is hot right now and it's only growing. I think there's been concern within the tennis community that pickleball has become the next thing, but you could almost argue that the whole fashion trend and these big brands reaching out and being associated with tennis is a sign of the opposite. That tennis at the end of the day is the cool kid, and pickleball is not the same thing because you don't see them leaning into that at all, right? And not that I've seen at least.
Yeah.
So no, I think it's great. I mean, the more of that, the better. I think it's really cool to see Hugo Boss all of a sudden signing players like Berrettini to like that's his tennis
Be on
clothes.
court.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
didn't see that 10 years ago, and not with brands like Hugo, you know. So
Yeah.
that's awesome. Absolutely.
It's interesting because like I'm surprised when they announced the Louis Vuitton Alcaraz
Right.
partnership. I immediately thought like, okay, you just had Federer, right, over the last 15 years. He was probably the most marketable athlete, one of the most marketable athletes on earth,
Right.
and he would fall into that Louis Vuitton brand pretty well, in my
Right.
opinion. So I was wondering, why over all those years did they not go after him? Were like the contracts now, like with like Nike, for example, are they structured differently where Alcaraz left that opening where he could still partner with another clothing brand, right? In Louis Vuitton. And back in the day, maybe they weren't structured that way. So Federer never had that opportunity. I don't know. Or like you said, maybe these brands, just tennis is kind of the cool thing again, and they're leaning into it.
Right. Absolutely.
So
And as much
maybe it's
as
a combination.
yeah, listen, and as much as our generation loves Rafa Djokovic and Roger, I mean, don't get me wrong, those are my guys. I think tennis was maybe in some ways on a performance level at its peak the last 20 years, but also maybe a bit boring compared to what's happening now. And I think these brands are going into it a bit more aggressive now because they're recognizing that, oh, all of a sudden, every 3 months, there's a bit of rotation and who's hot and who's in and who's getting recognized and who's getting attention, right? We got more good looking guys on tour all of a sudden who all have a little bit of a different thing going. And it was just the same for 20 years, basically,
Yeah.
before that, right? So I think, fashion moves fast, and I think tennis is moving faster now as well. I think brands like that right now. Whereas before, I mean, Rolex was like the perfect Federer because they just
Yeah.
want like stability and the same, like kind of like the best representation of those 20 years because like it was the same three, four guys, right? So
Right.
yeah.
Right. Okay. Moving off, changing topics a little bit. You're from Denmark. What do you
Mhm.
think of Holger Rune?
Holger's grown on me. When he first came out, I was skeptical. I mean, but he was still young, so I was also giving him a bit of the benefit of the doubt, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think I saw when he first came out, I saw a lot of potential. I saw a lot of drive, a lot of hunger. Um, a guy who has it, like he has that X factor, you know.
Yeah.
And to me, I was like, give this guy a couple of years to sort of figure it out. He needs the right team around him to sort of mature a little bit. Everyone sort of has to find the right footing, right? Like he didn't have a Juan Carlos Ferrero like Alcaraz has had the last few years to sort of give him the landing ground of here's how you conduct yourself and here's how you basically navigate the tour. So I think what we've seen from Holger the last year or two has been inconsistency because he's really still learning how to navigate the tour and how to manage himself and how to manage the season and all that stuff. And he's had a couple different people in his ear telling him things. Now I actually know his guy coach from his whole career essentially, Lars. Um,
Yeah.
I used to play with him a little bit when I was in Denmark as a kid. And he's a great guy, but he hasn't been on tour, so he doesn't have that experience, right? So I think I think Holger's in a bit of transition right now, but in terms of his potential, I don't see why he shouldn't be able to win 6 to 8 Grand Slams, honestly, and who knows, maybe more. I mean, obviously, him and Alcaraz and Sinner, I think, is going to be the top three, top four, maybe with an outsider like I don't know, Quarter or something.
Yeah.
The next 10 if not more years, right? So why wouldn't he be able to snag at least 6, 8 Grand Slams? He's got it, I think. So
He recently brought Becker onto
yeah,
his team
I noticed.
about 3 weeks ago or however long, and after Wimbledon, I think Rune won like 1 or 0 matches
Right.
up until like I mean, I there are reports that his back was bugging him, and like you're saying, it's just like he's young, like it's a
Mhm.
long season. There's so many ups and downs, and he
Mhm.
seems to be very like with him, the ups are really high and the downs are really low.
Yeah,
But that also means when the ups are really high, he can beat anybody. You know
100%.
what I mean? Which makes him very dangerous. But Becker now, being on his team, he's like, I don't know what he got to last week. He got to like the semifinals or
Yeah.
something like quarters, semifinals. He had a good run. What do you think about Becker joining his team? Becker has obviously the experience. He's
Mhm.
worked with Joker too.
Mhm.
But what I mean, he's a little bit, I don't know if I'd still call him a hothead, but he's had his history.
100%.
And Rune is a little bit maybe like up and down, maybe a little bit of a hothead. How do you think that relationship's going to work out?
I mean, obviously, time will tell. I mean, sometimes it's good to work with someone who's similar to you because they can relate and they can understand. They've been in your shoes, and sometimes it's good to work with someone who has all the things you don't have. Um, it's hard. I think right now it's probably a really good hire, honestly, because if you think about it, to me, Holger had a lot of success early on, like maybe almost too quick. Like he's 18, 19 years old. I think he's just turned 20 this year. Number 4 in the world. Like that's really impressive before you turn 20, essentially. And part of why I think he's had a little bit of a hiccup this year is because once he sort of got to the second half of the year, he realized, oh, well, last year, the second half of my year, I was really successful. So now all of a sudden I'm playing to defend. Whereas up until that point, mid 2023, he was not really defending. He was really just gaining. He was really every single time he played
Yeah.
a tournament, it was probably the second time he played it. And there was a good chance he was going to do better than he did the previous year because that was his first time playing it, right? And now
Yeah.
all of a sudden he's playing to defend. Now Becker had a lot of success early on too. So he was in that position as well. I mean, he defended Wimbledon when he was like 18. He had to defend Wimbledon. Didn't he win at 17?
Yeah, I think he won at 17. Yeah.
Yeah, so he's 18 years old,
Yeah.
18 years old when he has to defend it,
Yeah.
right? So he's been in that position before. He's been in those shoes, and he is temperamental. He is an emotional player at the end of the day. He's also very aggressive, just like Holger. And I think there's a lot of similarities between the two. I think it's a great hire. I'm excited to see what they can do together. I don't think it's going to be, an overnight fix. I think we're going to have to give it like 6 months or so to sort of like figure out where they're at. It's also a bit of it's a slower time of the season to get a new hire. Like, let's see how he does at Australian Open, like through Indian Wells. I hope they stay together for at least 6 months because I think they'll have to sort of see what they can do together. But I think it's a smart move. I'm not a huge Patrick Martugulu, is how you say his last name.
Yeah.
Not
I
a
can never
huge
pronounce it.
not a huge fan of him in general. So I don't
Why?
know. I just think he's that's a loaded question. It's a great um I just don't think I think what bothers me the most is he's a bit of the face of tennis coaching. And I don't know if he has the credentials for that. I don't know if he's ever built a player. He's very good at signing players and working with players when they're at a high level. I don't know if he has any respect from any of the top players. Like I don't know if the Federers and the Rafas and really recognize him.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying he's not a good coach. I'm just saying that maybe he's a bit hyped. I don't like how he's like since he's left Holger hasn't done well. The end of that, partnership, he hasn't done well. I don't know what happened with Halep. That's who he was with before, but she's banned on the tour now. Not a good look. He was with Tsitsipas for a moment too. He hasn't done well since he was with him, in my opinion.
Yeah.
The track record doesn't make sense to me compared to how much attention and hype he's getting. That's my only issue with him. And I've never worked with the guy, so I don't know if he's a good coach or a bad coach, but I just don't think. I also think maybe it's a bit of philosophy. I think the coach is the guy who stands in the background and lets the players shine. Some of the best coaches in history, most regular tennis players couldn't name them, like who knows who Magnus Norman is, but like he literally took, Stan Wawrinka and gave him, what was it, 4 Grand Slams against the top 3-4 guys in the history of tennis. No one really recognizes that, right? But it's no one, those are the guys, in my opinion, who are the heroes as coaches, and he's not busy hyping himself up, but could also be a cultural thing, a Danish thing. Who knows?
No, I agree. I agree with you. I've ripped Patrick a little bit on some other pods. I've obviously talked about the Halep thing, but who knows? But you know, I mean, it does seem like he tries to. His priority is almost like commercializing himself versus necessarily just being the best coach to his players.
Right.
You know what else is interesting that I didn't know about, but I just learned like a month ago about him is that he comes from like a billionaire family.
Yeah, I actually knew that, and that's.
Did you know that?
Yeah.
So that I don't know why, but it just changed a little bit how I felt about him. Like it shouldn't change anything because he's like created this like tennis academy on his own. He's done well. You got to give him props for that, but at the same time, you know what I mean? It was kind of that like rags to riches story, but then you find out he came from like his dad's like a Greek shipping billionaire. It's kind of like, oh, okay, well, you were able to take those risks required, knowing that you had like a
Right.
pretty big backup. Anyway, I just found that interesting.
And do we know if it's
Um,
profitable? Who knows, you know? Because does it have to be? Who knows, you know?
yeah, true,
Yeah,
true, true.
yeah.
Um, right on. What do you think? Another topic that's being talked a lot about uh, on the tour, and this probably you have some thoughts on this, being a tennis coach, is something that people used to laugh at me because I used to bring it up all the time. Okay. And I hated on certain tennis balls. And I said it was bullshit how some tournaments we play with certain balls, some tournaments we play with other balls. I despise pen tennis balls. They're like hard little rockets. They've destroyed, like, I've torn like a ligament in my wrist because of these balls. I'm adamant it's because of the ball.
Mm,
I even created like a survey here in British Columbia in the province for like Tennis BC to change the ball because I was like ruining kids' bodies. And it was just like destroying the game because it's like fast. It just it it took away from the enjoyment of the game. Only now, which I'm happy about, are players starting to talk about it.
mm,
Waranka is a pretty like big voice around it. Shelton just came out with a post earlier this week
mm.
saying, "Hey, I played with like 4 different tennis balls in the last month, and my arm is completely dead now." As a coach, what's your opinion on that? Do you have favorite tennis balls that you think are best for the body and the game, and just like overall, just changing the ball? Like imagine the NBA, they change. This is different. It doesn't affect their body, but just
Mm.
even the weighting, the timing, the softness. Like, doesn't that affect how players play the game?
100%. I do think it's odd that we've never really in tennis created sort of a category system for tennis balls that it's like also makes it easier for the regular consumer to sort of identify like what am I getting here? Because the average consumer is going to go out and buy pen balls because that's what's most accessible and they last longer, whatnot. I don't think it's a great ball. I think it's horrible,
Yeah,
but it's what people use, right? I doesn't make sense to me that we are on the tour playing with different balls every week. Like there should be I, I mean, they're probably being made in a lot of the same places. I'm assuming, right? So why are they even different to start with? And when you played at a high level for a long time, you understand the nuances of every single ball. So even if someone telling you, well, these are kind of the same balls, you know that there's a drastic difference because you played,
yeah,
you played at that level before. I think it's good they're bringing it up in terms of like the conversation around it. I do know that they've slowed down the game a lot through changing the balls over the years, which obviously is to make the game more entertaining. Now, because of that, they're getting more injured. Yeah, maybe it's not a good idea. I don't understand why we just can't use the same ball for everything. Maybe there's a clay ball, there's a grass ball, and
yeah.
hardwood ball, but
That's what I
beyond
was thinking.
that, simplify it and break it down into a lower level ball, a medium ball, and like a premium ball. And then the premium ball is the pro ball. That's what's being played with across the board. Now, having played been in tennis for so long, you and I understand how to identify what's a good ball and a bad ball, but no one's really categorized this, really, right? So for the average consumer, they don't know. So yeah,
Yeah.
no, I'm with you on it, 100%.
Yeah, whenever I see anybody on the court next to me and their ball rolls into my court and it's like a pro pen, I have to give them a lecture on why they shouldn't play with this ball, and they just think I'm some crazy person.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Anyway,
I don't know what my favorite one is. I've been using Babolat for a lot of years, but I'm also sponsored by Babolat, so maybe a little biased.
okay,
Um, I didn't like the Wilson U.S. Open when I started playing college tennis. I really didn't. It wasn't my
yeah,
ball, but I played with it for so many years that it probably is my favorite ball now. But yeah, who knows?
yeah. I'm a Dunlop ATP kind of guy.
Oh, that is a good ball. Yeah, that is a good one. Yeah,
That's a good ball.
yeah.
Okay, a couple more questions. I just want to jump actually back into fashion because it's so rare to talk to somebody that actually has style in the game. Usually I'm just talking to tennis junkies and
Okay.
they can't think outside of their narrow vision. But I want to ask you just about the current era of tennis that we're in versus other eras. What era would you say was the coolest era of tennis when it came to just like style on the court?
God, they're all cool for different things. I mean, I'm someone I love the John McEnroe fits of like the short shorts and like the rock star hair and like everything was like Bjorn Borg too. Everything was like slim and like close to the body and tucked in. with a headband. I mean, that was cool in many ways because it was so tennis, you know.
Yeah.
But then at the same time, I have just as much respect for the Agassi era of like the bandana and the oversized like Nike polo and maybe some like interesting shorts, whether it was like denim or like some, I don't know, some board shorts or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
I can appreciate like both of them just as much. And then the cool thing about tennis, there's also something about just like the regular white, like Sampras would roll up in, that just like had the athletic sort of fit, but it was just all white, right? So hard for me to pick one favorite. From a personal level, I think I probably enjoyed the Agassi era the most of like the '90s, a little bit more of a reckless sort of rock star, rock and roller sort of let's grow the hair out, and because it's also such a contrast to the image of tennis being such a country club thing. Because the funny thing is, if you like, most people view tennis as a country club sport, but if you watch into the professional tennis players, none of them really grew up in that at all, right? It's like no one's really spent much time in that. So, and
Yeah.
Agassi was like the perfect example of that, right? And the Williams sisters in many ways too. So, um, that was maybe my favorite if I had to pick one, because it was such a contrast at that time. Yeah,
Yeah, I agree.
yeah,
I think there's going to be more like um more different like I don't know, like there's different like styles, or people will be taking more risks on like what they actually come out to court
yeah.
on. It happens to US Open, obviously Serena Williams, like Federer and Wimbledon when he came out with the blazer, but and then recently Sinner with the Gucci bag coming
Mm,
out, I think for the US Open. I think that this is going to be a trend that will continue where they're going to start like wearing much more interesting outfits
yeah,
coming onto court so brands can really like showcase like different unique styles, whereas like on court it might be a little bit more subdued. There's only so much you can do with t-shirt and
right,
shorts. I think you can still do a lot, you know what I
right,
mean, if you're creative. But I actually find I love the US Open because it's the biggest show in tennis, right?
yeah.
And the outfits that people come in at, whether it's a night match,
Mm,
that's what I used to love about Nike. You know, back in the day, like a night match when Federer would come out
I
in
mean,
the all black, it was
oh
just
my
like
God, yeah,
I would get so excited about it, and like
oh my
that
God,
like no longer really exists. And it's like
no,
when he moved, and this is another question I want to ask you, but when he like moved to Uniqlo, like it actually physically upset me.
100%,
Okay.
100% same. The
And
only mistake he made in his career, in my opinion.
maybe the only mistake.
Yeah,
Maybe the only mistake. Obviously, financially, it allowed him to probably sign with On Running. Probably with Nike, he may not have had that opportunity. So financially, maybe it was a good idea, but just from like a coolness factor, big mistake.
100%.
Do you think that do you think some of these other brands, the Uniqlos of the world, the H&M of the world, because tennis is cool, they're trying to get into it? Do you think they're like diluting kind of like, I hate to use the word cool again, but like the coolness of like of tennis, and they're trying to get in and capitalize on the movement?
Hmm. Um, I think it has potential to do it, but I don't know if. Yes, we didn't like when Federer went from Nike to Uniqlo, but Uniqlo didn't do a terrible job. I just think because we saw Federer and Nike for so many years and that was the association, we didn't like it. But I don't think that what they put out there has been that bad at all. Now, if what they've been putting out was a poor version of Nike or something, and it was clear, like it was a replica or whatever, then it would have been different. But I don't think that's really been the case, to be honest. And they've still managed to produce a pretty good level, I think, of clothing. And I think if you ask the average stylist and person in fashion, they're not embarrassed to wear a piece of Uniqlo because they actually, maybe these trousers, they actually do them really well, or something like that. So I don't necessarily think that it's a, I don't think it's a terrible thing for tennis, to be honest. I think that
Okay.
Federer thing just hurt us emotionally.
What do you think about, I mentioned on running
Mm,
beyond just getting into from running shoes to tennis shoes,
mm,
obviously to tennis gear now. You know, they brought on Swiatek, they brought on Shelton.
mm.
What do you think? What do you think about that brand?
I think that's really cool, actually. That to me, that reminds me a bit of what I said about District Vision. Like, to me, On is, I mean, they're probably, very similar in terms of their, the aesthetic, really, also, but also what they're going for, the running brand. So I like that because it creates a little bit more of that, like, you don't have to wear something that's exclusive to tennis. It's actually athleisure that you can wear outside of that. You can go to the gym in this, you can play basketball in this. It's more everyday wear in some senses, and it's just athletic wear, and it's not just like tennis. And I also think that allows them to experiment a little bit more with colorways, and like he had the cut off sleeves, and he even had, I think, a night a night version of it and a day version of it, right? Which I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's a different look. I actually like it a lot. I didn't like the all white one. I don't think that specifically, but I
Yeah.
like the other one he had for the evening matches. So
Right.
it's really cool to see, and they're going aggressive. They're signing him and they're signing Swiatek. I think they're serious about it, and they want to be a brand that's beyond just running, but they want to get into tennis as well. And I'm sure this is just the beginning. Other sports as well. So no, I
Yeah.
actually like it. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I agree. Um, okay, moving topics back to coaching here. So, focused on you and like with your clients, in LA, like what type of clients, students, however you refer to them, do you typically bring on? Where are they trying to get to at their game? Is this like someone that just wants to get out there, improve their stroke so they can have more fun at a social level? Are you training anybody to go, serious juniors or anybody else? Kind of like what's your
Mhm.
client base look like?
Great question. I mean, I really try to diversify so I don't just have the same type of person. I have beginners, I have people who played for a few years, I have people who played all their lives. Some of them are playing league, some of them are playing matches weekly, some are literally playing tennis every single day. And then I have others who that's the once a week sort of hobby thing. And, they see it as a bit of an experience or therapy or part of their fitness regimen. And that's like really the extent of it. I kind of have a little bit in both sides of the spectrum, and then everything in between, to be honest. And so for me, that's also just a lot more gratifying because I feel like I learn more that way. If I only work with the same player, I think it would become redundant for me. I like when I get a beginner because it forces me to tap back into the basics of things, the fundamentals, and reconnect with someone who's never picked up, the sport before, and really getting back to how do you learn something, right? But then at the same time, I love to work with someone where it becomes very advanced and we're talking all strategy. I mean, literally, how are you going to beat this player that you keep losing to at your club? And these guys are maybe like 5-0 players, like these, they're real players, and I play in as well, and I like that a lot too. Then it feels to me that feels close to when I was coaching high level juniors at academies and high level college players, because it's the same conversation we're having. It's how can you optimize the game that you already have. And I do think at the end of the day, that's what I do best, because it's very mental. Obviously, it's very strategic and it's very psychological. A lot of my coaching background, the way I was coached, comes from a place of how do we optimize what you already have. So I sort of apply that on every level. I look at the player as a as an the individual as like, what are they already bringing to the table that's natural to them, that they find easy or that comes natural, and what is some of the limitations that we might have to work on. But let's make this player the best possible version of themselves, and let's not come in with, this is what the textbook says you're supposed to do. Let's start with the forehand. um, I do think everyone brings something very unique to the table, and I'd like to lean into that and double down on that. Like, if I work with a player who's not the most patient player ever, who is like a little scatterbrained, I know I'm not going to turn that person into the best grinder or like pusher in the world.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to work with that a little bit, and let's try to make them aggressive, but then at the same time somewhat consistent, so they're not just like all over the place at the same time. And I find that fun. That process is a lot of fun to me, figuring out how that person works psychologically and optimizing and doubling down on that. So that's how I approach it in general, and I find working with different players is most gratifying for me. So
Yeah, I completely agree. I can tell that you're just in talking to you over this last hour, you're very passionate about coaching.
thank you, appreciate it.
And the people that you teach. Um, we're almost at an hour now. I really appreciate your time, Mads. I think it's been a great conversation, super interesting. For people that want to find you, I know that you're a busy guy. I know you've already got a full roster, but if somebody wants to reach out to you, get lessons, talk to you more, whether it's about, you said that you also do training off the court, on the court. What's the best way to find you?
Best way is on Instagram. My handle is Jaxmads, JXMADS. And shoot me a DM, obviously. I'll get back to you. But yeah, and whenever, yeah, I'm in LA essentially. That's where I teach out of in Silver Lake. But yeah,
Where's Silver Lake in Hollywood, or whereabouts is it?
yeah, it's pretty close to Hollywood. It's just east of. Yeah, yeah. So you got Hollywood,
Okay,
Los Feliz, and then Silver Lake. So about 10 minutes from Hollywood. Yeah,
okay, nice,
yeah.
nice. All right, man. Well, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we can do this again sometime soon.
100%. Thanks for having me, and let me know when you're in LA. We'll get on the court, man.